Okay. So, ayan. So, after, during lunch, syempre, even before during your lunch, I'm pretty sure na all of you ate something, kumain kayo. And actually, eating is one of those activities that we always do. Diba? Looking forward kayo dyan sa mga snack time, tsaka sa mga lunch break. Kahit ng grade 11 kayo, hindi kayo makahintay ng oras, lalo na kapag oras na ng snack. Kahit na hindi naman kayo kumakain sa kantin, gusto nyo lang makita si Nanay Mayang. Diba? So, excited kayo lagi sa mga ganyang oras. So, bakit nga ba kailangan natin kumain? And earlier in our lesson, when you created your food diary, we said that one of the reasons or the primary reason why we are eating food is because we need the nutrients that we get from the food. And we need it because it provides the energy that we use for our everyday activities. So lahat ng cellular activities in your body, lahat ng ginagawa mo everyday, including your heart continuously beating and circulating your blood even when you're sleeping, keeping your body warm or at least maintaining the body temperature, those activities or those processes require energy. And the energy that we use in our body every day comes from the food that we eat. So the process of cellular respiration focuses on how our body converts these nutrients into ATP, which is the form of cellular energy. So, syempre, yung kinain ninyong kaninang lunch, it has to be converted eventually into energy. And the process on how our body converts these nutrients into ATP, the usable form of energy in our body, is what we call as cellular respiration. Okay? So, kaya nga under siya ng bioenergetics. Kasi it is a way of producing energy for living organisms. Last week, our topic is photosynthesis. And photosynthesis produces food which can be converted into energy among autotrophs. So sabi natin, photosynthesis is only possible for organisms who are able to create their own food through the process of photosynthesis or converting light into energy. Eh, hindi naman tayo autotrophs. We are actually heterotrophs. And heterotrophs, we don't have the ability to create our own food. Kaya lagi tayong kumakain. Kasi hindi natin kayang gumawa ng sarili nating pagkain. And once we have acquired and ingested this food, once all of the nutrients are absorbed at na-deliver na into the individual cells by the red blood cells. So ito yung picture. Itong red blood cells na to, sila yung nag-deliver ng nutrients na to into the individual cells in your body. So once the cells receives it, these nutrients, then cellular respiration will take place, which is converting it into usable energy. Ayan. Hello kay Elaine. At saka sino yung kasama mo, Elaine? Dalawa yan. Si Adrian. Tsaka
Email po.
Okay. Nag-change na ba ng strand? Okay. Sige lang. Huwag ka nang umalis. Okay lang yan. Okay. So now let's start our discussion. This is an overview of cellular respiration. So yung photosynthesis ninyo last week, dalawang stage lang siya. Light-dependent stage at saka light-independent stage. Pero pagdating ng cellular respiration, ang pag-uusapan natin ay tatlong stages. Isang glycolysis, which happens in the cytosol or in the plasma membrane. Take note of this, ha? the first process of cellular respiration is the process of glycolysis, which happens in the cell membrane. Not cell membrane, sorry. Plasma. No! Oh my God, what's the word? Another word for cytosol. Asa si Ayesa?
Cytoplasm.
Ay, hindi. Ano yan? Wala naman nasa isip ko.
Cytoplasm po.
Yes, thank you very much. Ayan na. Ba't ako nasa cell membrane? Ayan. Glycolysis happens in the cytosol or in the cytoplasm. Thank you, Ayesa. Okay. And then from there, it will continue. It will go into the mitochondria, which is the organelle that is known as the powerhouse of the cell. And the reason why it's called the powerhouse of the cell is because it produces ATP or the cellular energy. So paano niya napoproduce yung ATP na yon? Through the process of cellular respiration. So there are two stages inside the mitochondria. The first one is the citric acid cycle. Some people will call it as the Krebs cycle. Sulat ko na lang. Krebs cycle. They call it Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. Ayan. Which again happens in the mitochondria. And then after the Krebs cycle, it will continue dito sa electron transport chain. Again, it happens in the mitochondria. And the entire cellular respiration produces a total of 38 ATPs. 2 ATPs are produced during glycolysis, 2 ATPs produced during the Krebs cycle, and then during the electron transport chain, the majority of the ATP, a total number of 34 ATPs are produced in the electron transport chain. So the entire cellular respiration produces 38 ATPs. Now you have to remember na yung 38 ATPs is only produced during, how do you call this? If the situation or the environment is favorable. Ibig sabihin, enough yung nutrients, enough yung oxygen, so lahat ng kailangan niyang materials is present, so it can produce 38 ATPs. Now, sometimes the situation is not favorable. So minsan mas mababa sa 38 ATPs ang napoproduce niya. But in average, it is around 34 to 38 ATPs ang kayang ma-produce in one cellular respiration. Okay, so yung 34 to 38 ATPs na yan is used by the cells to do the cellular activities na kailangan ng ating katawan. Okay? So as we go further into our discussion, iisa-isahin natin ano yung nangyayari sa glycolysis, ano yung nangyayari sa citric acid cycle, at ano yung nangyayari dito sa electron transport chain. Okay? And you have to remember that similar to photosynthesis, the laws of thermodynamics applies dito sa ating cellular respiration. So number one, the first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but it can only change in form. So cellular respiration, mula sa glucose, which is the energy that we are getting from the food that we eat, it will eventually change its form and become ATP. So hindi siya nasira, hindi siya nabawasan, hindi siya nadagdagan, nagpalit anyo lang siya. From glucose, it becomes ATP. And then the second law of thermodynamics also applies that all systems tend to go from a state of greater organization to a state of lesser organization. And when it reaches this lesser state of organization, it will eventually lose some form of usable energy. So hindi lahat ng energy coming from the food that we eat is eventually transformed into ATP. Yung iba doon, hindi na natin nagagamit sa katawan, it is lost in the form of heat. At saka syempre, yung ibang parte ng kinakain ninyo, nilalabas nyo naman sa banyo, di ba? So hindi naman lahat ng kinain ninyo is eventually converted into glucose. Di ba? Kaya nga kayo tumatae. Kasi yun yung mga forms of unusable energy na kailangan alisin sa katawan. And the second law of thermodynamics is also the reason why bakit kailangan 3 stages itong ating cellular respiration. At kung mapapansin ninyo, sa cellular respiration, nagsisimula siya sa konting ATP hanggang sa pinakamaraming ATP. So hindi bigla ang taas yung conversion niya ng ATP. Pa-konti-konti, 2 muna ngayon, 2 ulit mamaya hanggang sa ma-produce niya na yung pinakamataas na possible na energy, which is 34. So ganun lang din yan dun sa photosynthesis na hindi siya pwedeng diretsong ita-transfer kaagad. Okay? So let's start. Ayan, ready na ba kayo? So the first part is what we call as glycolysis. And glycolysis, like I said, happens in your cytoplasm. So you have to remember, ano nga ba yung journey ng nutrients ninyo? So pag kinain niyo siya, pumasok siya sa bibig ninyo, from doon sa bibig, it will travel along the esophagus, it will go to your stomach, the stomach will start to digest it, and then it will go to the small intestine. The small intestine will further digest it, and then it will be absorbed. Pag na-absorb na sa small intestine yon, saan na napunta yung nutrients? From the small intestine, it transfers to your circulatory system. Ang sumalo na dun sa nutrient is the red blood cells. Kasi yung red blood cells, yung parang ano yan, parang ninja van, parang JT Express. Sila yung taga-deliver ng mga in-order ninyo sa Shopee at saka sa Lazada. So saan i-deliver ng red blood cells yung glucose or yung nutrient? I-deliver nila yon sa individual cells or sa individual na bahay-bahay, di ba? Yung mga ninja van at JT Express. So pag nakarating na siya doon sa individual cell, you have to remember that glucose is a polar substance. So it will travel through the phospholipid bilayer. So pag nakapasok na siya sa phospholipid bilayer, saan na siya napunta? Sa cytoplasm. At pag narating niya na yung cytoplasm, which is the inside of the cell, then it will undergo the process of glycolysis. And glycolysis basically is the process of breaking down glucose. So kailangan i-break down itong napakalaking molecule ng glucose na to. Para pag na-breakdown na siya into simpler substance, saka siya papasok doon sa mitochondria. Okay? So let's start with glucose. So ito yung glucose. Glucose is a monosaccharide. Diba? We learned nung first semester, it's one of our earliest topic, sugars, carbohydrates, and monosaccharides. Monosaccharides meaning it is one unit of sugar, and glucose here is one unit of sugar. So glucose is C6H12O6, meaning it has 6 carbon. So ayan, carbon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. So we start with an individual glucose. So I want to change this glucose into a glucose 6-phosphate. So how am I going to do that? Kukuha siya ng ATP. So gumamit siya ng ATP. Tatanggalin niya yung isang phosphate sa ATP. So this ATP will now become ADP. Tatandaan natin, ang isang ATP has 3 phosphates. 3 ang phosphate nito. Ninakawan siya ng isang phosphate, -1. So ngayon, 2 na lang ang phosphate niya. So from ATP, adenosine triphosphate, naging adenosine diphosphate na lang siya. Saan napunta yung isang phosphate? ninakaw ni glucose. So ngayon si glucose, originally wala siyang phosphate. Diba? C6H12O6. Dinagdagan siya ngayon ng isang phosphate. So this is carbon 1, carbon 2, carbon 3, carbon 4, carbon 5. This is carbon 6. Saan naka-attach yung phosphate? Kay carbon 6. Kaya ang pangalan niya ay glucose 6-phosphate. Kasi sa carbon 6 naka-attach yung phosphate na ninakaw sa ATP. Okay? And then, ngayon naman, alisin natin pala. Okay. So, let's continue to the next part. Okay? So, hindi siya satisfied na isa lang yung phosphate niya. Gusto niya, madagdagan pa siya ng isa pang phosphate. So, saan ulit manggagaling yon? Magnanakaw ulit siya ng phosphate from another ATP. So, earlier on, gumamit siya ng isang ATP. Ngayon, gagamit ulit siya ng isa pang ATP. So, parang ang nangyari is, gumamit na siya ng dalawang ATP. So, minus 2 ATP na siya at this point. Yung phosphate na ninakaw niya ng pangalawang beses, ilalagay ulit niya dito sa glucose. So now it will become fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. So bakit naging bisphosphate? Kasi dalawa na yung phosphate na naka-attach sa kanya. Saan naka-attach yung dalawang phosphate na yon? Yung isa na sa carbon 1, tapos yung isa na sa carbon 6. So, 6 pa rin yung carbon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Carbon 1 and carbon 6 has phosphate attached to them. Saan nanggaling yung phosphate? Doon sa ninakaw niyang phosphate from the ATP. So, meron na tayo ngayong fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Okay pa ba tayo doon? Pa-thumbs up sign kung malinaw pa or medyo naguguluhan na. Okay, so meron ng mga 4 or 5 nag-raise ng thumbs up sign. Yung iba hindi ko alam, gising pa ba kayo dyan? Okay, so again, from glucose, nadagdagan ng isang phosphate, tapos dinagdagan ulit ng isa pang phosphate. So now you have fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Ngayon, ang gagawin na niya, kailangan na niyang i-divide itong 6-carbon compound na to into 2. Nakita na natin itong nangyari doon sa photosynthesis. Yung 6-carbon na rubisco, di ba, i-divide niya into 2. So ngayon, divided into 2, tag-isa silang phosphate, tapos may 3 carbon compound. And this is what we call as G3P or glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay? So ito yung isang G3P, ito yung pangalawang G3P. Saan nanggaling yan? Pag yung 6 na carbon, dinivide mo sa 2, so equally divided, may 3 carbon tsaka tag-isang phosphate na sila. So ito yung G3P number 1, ito yung G3P number 2. Bakit siya tinawag na G3P? Kasi yung phosphate ay naka-attach doon sa carbon 3. So this is carbon 1, carbon 2, carbon 3, naka-attach sa carbon 3 yung phosphate. Therefore, we call it as glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay? Do we have any questions so far? Wala. So, okay na tayo. Pag na-divide na at nagkaroon na ng dalawang G3P, ang gagawin niya, yung each or individual G3P will donate their phosphate. So, ngayon at this time, tatanggalin niya na yung phosphate na naka-attach sa kanya. Saan niya i-donate yung phosphate? it will be donated to NADP. NAD. Okay? So yung NAD na to is similar sa photosynthesis. It is a carrier of energy. And pag nag-add ka ng isang phosphate dito, it will produce a compound that we call as NADH or NADPH. Okay? So again, similar to your photosynthesis, they are carriers of energy. Do we have any questions? Wala pa naman? Okay. So ngayon, iisa yung kanyang phosphate dyan, di ba? Ay, sorry. Mali pala. Baliktad yung idea ko. Yung isang phosphate ng G3P, dinagdagan niya ng isa. So ngayon, it will produce what we call as 1,3-bisphosphate glycerate. Ulitin natin ha. Backtrack. Balik. Rewind. Yan. So, yung fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, i-divide niya into 2. So, it will form dalawang G3P, which is the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. So, what does a glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate look like? It looks like this. Tatlong carbon, tapos may isang phosphate. Okay? So, ngayon, magnanakaw ulit siya ng isa pang phosphate. Oops. Ayan. So, this time, saan niya kukuhanin yung nanakawin niyang phosphate? It will be coming from the NADH. Okay? So, may isa na siyang phosphate dito. Nagnakaw ulit siya ng isa pang phosphate. So, now, we have what we call as your 1,3-bisphosphate glycerate. So, dati, yung G3P, yung phosphate, naka-attach sa carbon 3. Nadagdagan ulit siya ng isa pang phosphate. So, ngayon, yung pangalawang phosphate na nadagdag sa kanya will attach doon sa carbon 1. Kaya siya 1,3. Ibig sabihin, the phosphate is attached on carbon 1 at saka carbon 3. It is still a form of glyceraldehyde, but this time it has 2 phosphates attached on carbon 1 and carbon 3. So ngayon, from isang phosphate, naging dalawa ulit yung phosphate niya. So ilan na yung ninakaw niyang phosphate? Basically, 3 na. Tapos pag sinama natin yung isang G3P, pang-4 na siya. Okay? Next. So yung dalawang phosphate niyang to, it will be used to create ATP. So tatanggalin muna niya yung nasa carbon 1. Yung phosphate na to, idadagdag niya sa isang ADP. So now it will form 1 ATP. So nabawasan siya ng isang carbon, yung carbon 1. So ang maiiwan sa kanya ay 3-phosphoglycerate. Kasi isa na lang ang phosphate niya, naka-attach sa carbon 3. And then, magpapalit siya ng anyo. Okay? Originally, nasa carbon 3 yung phosphate. Ililipat niya sa carbon 2. So now, you have 2-phosphoglycerate. Kasi naka-attach na siya sa carbon 2. And then, it will use water. It will produce water. And then, this 2-phosphoglycerate, aalisin niya yung final phosphate niya. Pag inalis niya na yung final phosphate niya, it will be able to create another ATP. Idadagdag niya dito yung tinanggal niyang phosphate. It will now form ATP. Ang maiiwan na lang sa kanya yung 3 carbon, which will eventually be called as pyruvate. Okay? So, ang nangyari sa ating glycolysis is that at first, nagnanakaw lang siya ng ATP. Nagnanakaw siya ng ng phosphate, and then eventually, yung phosphate na yon, dinonate din niya to create what we call as ATP. So from the process of glycolysis, ang kanyang ginamit na ATP ay ilan? Can anybody tell me? Ilang ATP ang ninakawan niya ng phosphate? Yes, Jordsen.
Dalawa po, Chair.
Dalawa. Isa dito sa step number 1 at saka isa ulit doon sa step number 3. So basically, -2 siya ng ATP. Tama ba ako? Nakakasunod pa ba lahat? Okay. Pero at the latter part of the glycolysis, hindi nakagawa naman siya ng ATP. Ilan ang nagawa niyang ATP? Can anybody answer? Yes, Jordsen.
Dalawa din po.
Dalawa, ito. Pero itong dalawang nagawa niya na to ay sa isang G3P pa lang. Tama ba ako? Meron pa isang G3P dito. Yung dalawang ATP na to, nanggaling lang siya dito.
Hindi apat yan, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. So in total, for every glucose molecule, nakakagawa siya ng 4 na ATP. Kasi yung glycolysis na yan, parang business-minded person yan. Nag-invest muna siya ng energy, kaya siya nag-2. Diba? Usually, ang mga businessman, kailangan minsan mangungutang muna sa bangko para may puhunan. Or yung iba, nag-iipon, titipirin yung sarili para makapag-ipon ng puhunan. Kasi, sa paningin ng glycolysis, okay lang na mangutang siya ng 2 ATP. Kasi pag nangutang siya ng 2 ATP, makakapag-create naman siya ng 4 na ATP. So, worth it lang para sa kanya yung investment niya. Kasi in total, kumita naman siya ng 2 ATP. So, hindi na masama yung naging investment niya. Okay? So, sabi ko nga, business-minded person, yung ATP na yan. So, sa simula, wala kasi siyang phosphate. So, paano siya mag-create ng energy? So, kailangan muna niyang magnakaw or mangutang sa simula ng glycolysis. At kapag enough na yung investment niya at kaya na niyang gumawa ng sarili niyang ATP, saka siya gumawa ng ATP. Okay? So, pag kinompute natin, generally, ang net ATP na na-produce for glycolysis is only 2. Kasi yung 2, pambayad, utang. So, kung babalikan natin yung ating tawag dito, diagram kanina, diba? Ayan ang glycolysis. Ang na-produce lang niya ay 2 ATP. Bakit 2? Kasi yung 2 inutang niya. So, bayad utang, in total, 2 lang. Pero pag in-analyze mo yung process niya, actually, 4 yung nagawa niya. It's just that, babawas natin syempre yung negative. Okay? Okay pa ba tayo sa glycolysis? Grade 12. Okay, malinaw pa yan? Sure? Okay. So ngayon, yes, Jordsen.
Yung clarification lang po, yung, di ba po kumuha siya ulit ng phosphate from NADP? So, yung NADP po naging NADH plus H, ganun po talaga yung, parang,
Yes po.
niya?
Yes po.
NADH.
NADH. Yung sa,
Okay.
ano tawag dito? Yung sa photosynthesis kasi NADPH. Tama ba?
Opo, ganun.
NADH sa
Opo.
cellular respiration.
Sige po, thank you.
Okay, so now, sige, sagutin natin itong question na to. I have 2 minutes in my meeting room before tayo mag-rejoin. Ano ang kailangan for the process of glycolysis?
ATP.
Kailangan. Let's start.
Phosphate?
Saan tayo nagsimula sa glycolysis? Coming from the name itself, glycolysis.
Glucose.
Glucose.
Thank you. Ayan, si Yunila, nahuli. Okay, so what we need is glucose. And you have to remember that glucose comes from the food that we eat. Ito yung ida-digest niya, i-convert niya. And what is produced through the process of glycolysis. Thank you very much, Jernan. Yes, we are producing ATP, to be specific to ATP. What else are we producing through the process of glycolysis? Ano yung end product niya nung natanggal na niya lahat ng phosphate at ang naiwan na lang ay 3 carbon? From glucose. Thank you very much. Pyruvate. Sino yung sumagot na yan?
Ako, sir.
Sino yung ako? Hindi ko nakita. Ayan. So we need to pyruvate. Thank you, Jordan. Okay? So itong pyruvate na to will continue into our citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle. The pyruvate will now go into the mitochondria. So from the cytoplasm, it will travel to the mitochondria. So please rejoin the same meeting